Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into today's special interview. We are diving into an incredibly interesting discussion about BRICS and the world of geopolitics. And we have an exceptional guest with us today, Alex Krainer. If you are not already familiar with Alex, let me give you a quick introduction. He is a renowned author, a market strategist, and the founder of Krainer Analytics. Alex has written two highly regarded books in the trading community, Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Both have earned significant praise for their unique insights into the financial markets. With years of experience in market analysis, Alex has built a reputation as a trusted voice in financial circles, even contributing to Zero Hedge. But it's not just his expertise in trading that makes him stand out. Alex is also deeply involved in geopolitical analysis. His work often intersects global finance and political events. And today, we are going to explore some of those fascinating connections. One topic we are particularly excited about is Alex's analysis of Syrian situation, a perspective that has taken significant attention, including from us. We dedicated a specific video to his analysis. You can find it right here on our channel. Alex's insights challenge conventional thinking and offer a fresh take on global issues.
Syria, a nation that withstood over a decade of war, intervention, and siege, has suddenly crumbled. In just 10 days, December headlines shocked the world. Damascus had fallen, key military units were demobilized, and territories were lost to groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS. How does a country that resisted ISIS, al-Qaeda, and Western proxies for years, even with limited Russian support, collapse so rapidly now? Is this collapse a strategic gambit? Today, on Think BRICS, we present an exclusive interview with Alex Krainer, a market analyst and geopolitical thinker. Krainer suggests Syria's collapse is a deliberate trap by Russia, Iran, and BRICS nations. History shows us that wars are often won not by force alone, but through strategic exhaustion. Consider how Russia historically defeated Napoleon and Hitler, luring them deep into its territory and bleeding their resources dry. Could Syria's fall mirror this strategy? Now, with Syria at the heart of the Middle East, the roles may be reversed. Krainer suggests that Russia, Iran, and the broader BRICS coalition are playing a long game, letting Western-backed forces and Turkish proxies advance into a fragmented Syria, only to trap them in endless, chaotic warfare. Syria's sudden collapse comes against the backdrop of seismic geopolitical shifts. Just days before HTS launched its offensive, Russian President Vladimir Putin dismissed any notion of a ceasefire in Ukraine. BRICS nations, Russia, China, India, Iran, are challenging Western dominance. Syria's location makes it pivotal for regional power dynamics and energy pipelines. The strategy appears multifaceted. NATO and its allies could pour immense resources into Syria, echoing Iraq and Afghanistan. Divisions among Turkish proxies, extremist groups, and Western-backed forces escalate, as these factions not only fight Assad, but turn on one another. The implications go far beyond Syria. A prolonged conflict could disrupt oil flows and destabilize Gulf nations. Rising costs would strain Western economies already facing inflation. Is this part of Russia and BRICS' strategy to reshape the global order? To many, Syria's collapse looks like a Western victory. NATO, Turkey, and even Israel achieved rapid gains. But scratch the surface, and it starts to look like something else. Could Assad's forces, backed by Russia and Iran, be deliberately withdrawing, weakening their adversaries through attrition? If so, this could be a trap on a scale we haven't seen since Afghanistan. The stakes are high. The next months will show if Syria drains the West or boosts BRICS. Today's conversation with Alex Krainer dives deep into this critical scenario. Is Syria's collapse a strategic feint? How does this connect to the broader BRICS agenda? And what are the long-term consequences for NATO and the West?
Hello, Alex. Nice to see you. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Anastasia. Good to join you this morning, and greetings to your viewers and listeners.
Thanks. Well, dear listeners, dear viewers, before we dive into our conversation, be sure to check the description below to find links for Alex's works, so you can explore more on his thought-provoking content. Okay, let's get started from the very beginning, Alex. Your point of view about the Syrian situation, I should say, have made waves on the YouTube, and I would like you to explain better your position, your point of view. Who is the victim and who is the author of that trap in Syria?
Okay, the victim is easy. It's the Syrian people and the government of Bashar al-Assad. Who is the author? That we have to guess. We will know more with time. We might never know the full truth about it, but I believe that the agenda to overthrow Bashar al-Assad regime definitely comes from the Western power sources, particularly Washington and London. They clearly used Turkey as a proxy in this. Russia and Iran were faced with a choice. Do they fight to shore up Bashar al-Assad's government, or do they retreat? And they clearly made the decision to retreat. Now, I am not clear at all about the role of Turkey, because there's a possibility that Erdogan is a willing accomplice of Western intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, the Mossad, and that he launched this incursion from Idlib in coordination with them. Well, this is likely true, but the question is whether Erdogan had sincere intentions here, or whether he is playing them. And then, is he in cahoots with the Russians and the Iranians, or did he stab them in the back? We have we might find reasons to believe either scenario, but I think that we won't know until considerable time has passed. We've seen that Russians and the Iranians did not protest very loudly what happened. We've seen that the relationship between Russia and Turkey on the one hand, and Iran and Turkey on the other hand, were not substantially damaged. There were not very, very bitter words of recrimination going back and forth. There was no recalling of ambassadors. There was no filing of protest letters or anything of the sort. In fact, we've seen that a certain level of cooperation is continuing. I was recently on a podcast with Nima Al-Khorshid, the Iranian young man who runs a podcast out of Brazil. And he told me that the Iranians recently, just days ago, literally, what are we today, 19th December, so, earlier this month, announced a $20 billion investment into Turkey. And, the investments from China and from Russia are still on uninterrupted. The Russians are finishing up a large nuclear power station that they're building in Turkey, and the Russian engineers are training up Turkish engineers to manage this. The Chinese are building a BYD car manufacturing plant in Turkey. Alibaba is bringing a $2 billion investment, and that there's more individual projects like this. And we've even seen that the Turks have requested the Russians to remain in their bases in Tartus and Latakia, to remain present in the region. And by all appearances, Turkish Foreign Office, Foreign Ministry, and their intelligence and military structures exert very significant control over the leadership of HTS, the new and improved Al-Nusra Front, which is now has formed the government in Damascus. And we'll find out what happens. There is a risk that we might see factional warfare break out all over all over Syria. And whatever agenda is afoot might deteriorate. It might, end up with unintended consequences. There's there's high likelihood that the Turks are going to launch an invasion and into Syria, especially the northeast and northern expanses of Syria to deal with the Kurdish issue. Apparently, units, perhaps divisions of Syrian army are intact. We have already seen guerrilla warfare style attacks on these jihadi units in Syria so far. So we'll find out. There's no telling what it is. For me, a way to try to make sense of what the longer term objective might be is to look at the general security architecture on the Eurasian continent. And there, I think we can read both what the intentions are of the Western powers and what the intentions are of the BRICS multipolar side led by Russia, Iran, and China.
Well, it seems that Russia, Iran, China, of course, they behave like nothing has happened. So, as you told that there was no. Neither Russia, neither Iran, neither other BRICS nations, they did not do anything. So Turkey now has, all cards in their hands. So they can do everything they want. I see it like that in Syria. But Syria is now like, like a patchwork blanket. So
yes.
a lot of groups trying to take an advantage. From one side, there is Turkey. From another side, there is Israel. So all that proxies, ex-Al-Qaeda, and all that terroristic groups in the country. And on top of that, we cannot forget about the investments and the gas pipeline from Qatar. How, in your opinion, how do they manage all that? Is it possible? So all that mixed up and pipeline on the top.
Well, that's the part that remains to be seen because, to my mind, to build a pipeline, you need a secure territory, right? You need to be able to control the security for that territory. We've seen what happened to Nord Stream pipelines, right? So if somebody wants to blow it up, if somebody wants to sabotage it, then they can. So you have to pacify the country. And you have to secure it in the way that the pipeline then can function smoothly and reliably. So we've seen that they've now said okay, so now this pipeline is on, we're going to build it, it's going to continue, and that's a win for us. But that means then that you're going to have to allocate resources and beef up the security to make sure that that pipeline functions. And so that's where, to my mind, the Western powers have walked into a potential quagmire. This pipeline might be the lure that's going to cause them to commit more and more resources into Syria. And, it could be a similar type of trap that the CIA and Zbigniew Brzezinski set up for the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So, walking in is easy, especially when you're let in. And this is the element that triggered my suspicion is the way in which the Syrian military and its government collapsed like a house of cards in a space of 11 days, because that just doesn't happen. We had all kinds of stories coming from Syria about how badly the soldiers were paid, and that the command structure, the commanders were very corrupt, and that Bashar al-Assad almost went catatonic. He didn't even bother with governing the countries, and the Russians were telling him, hey, your military is weak, we need to reform it. And he said, no, I'm not interested. And then the Iranians were warning him about the impending invasion from Idlib, and he didn't listen to them either. But, if you go, this is the problem with all these stories is that you don't really know where they're coming from. But we do know, because this was revealed by the Gray Zone, by a journalist named Ben Norton. There was a big dump of documents from the UK, the official government documents, that show that they have a large number of let's say, media activists and journalists on the ground in Syria, and they are controlled by a number of Western public relations companies that kind of flood the zone in the Arabic and Western media about what's going on there. And we're talking about literally many hundreds of reporters, many hundreds of these people providing information into the mix. I think that one of these public relations agencies had contact with 1,600 individuals across Syria who were feeding the information into this, and then of course this information is filtered and a certain narrative is being shaped up. So we have to be very careful about everything we think we know. Suddenly we find out that Bashar al-Assad was like a cartoon villain. He didn't care about the country. He was only concerned about his luxury car collection, which was massive. They always do this. They always try to present the leader of a country as a corrupt person who was, accumulating a large amount of wealth. And they have nothing better to go on. They will point out that they have expensive glasses or a fancy watch, like Vladimir Putin, I think it was Daniel Ortega who had fancy glasses, and they said like, oh, look, he's wearing these expensive glasses. And so they always do this. This is part of the playbook. I don't know. I know that Bashar al-Assad had a Porsche, but I don't know about any other cars. That was not a thing until the regime fell. And now all of a sudden it's a thing. Well, did we see photographs of this large car collection? I didn't see one. Anyway.
Well, the last thing I read about Bashar al-Assad, that he sent number of airplanes filled up with cash, euro and US dollars, to Moscow.
Of course. Of course. And then also, we learned that he didn't even bother to warn his family members, and he just left them there, and some of them died. And oh, what a horrible person. We just don't know. We just don't have any reports now whether he was like, cackling with glee as he was doing this. But, there's an obvious attempt to demonize the figure, right? At the same time, there's a very obvious attempt to polish up the image of these head-chopping jihadis. And now they wear nice sports coats and shirts, and they have a new haircut, and beard is trimmed nicely. And then they meet up with all these European and British and American officials and take photographs. And, Bashar al-Assad had a regime. These guys are the new leadership. There's very careful choosing of the names. So I disbelieve practically everything that comes from there. I'm looking more to things that make sense versus things that don't make sense. And so the stories about the way that the Syrian military collapsed in 10 days didn't make any sense whatsoever. So I assume that this came from this information mills in Syria. I was a soldier during wartime. I was paid very, very poorly. I mean, to say that you're paid poorly is an insult to people who are paid poorly. It's next to nothing. That money is assumed to be for razor blades, toothpaste, and the coffee here and a beer here or there. It's not meant to be a salary. So the whole idea that Syrian soldiers reckoned, hey, we're not paid well enough to defend our country, so they all just decided to go home, is completely ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. And so I would be able to accept that here and there, some units were so revolted and disgruntled that they mutinied, because this can happen in war and in peacetime. They might even, shoot their commanders dead and desert, but that can happen sporadically here and there. That cannot happen the whole
entire army
military in the space of 10 days. That just, that's the same as explaining steel frame buildings coming down due to office fires. It just doesn't work that way. So that to me was a massive red flag. There had to have been orders to disband and to abandon position. Now, if the Syrians were facing an overwhelming force, that they could not defeat. That would be an explanation. But that was not the case. These jihadis were between 20 and 30,000 people, between 20 and 30,000 troops on pickup trucks, not even tanks and proper armored personnel carriers, and mostly armed with light weapons. And they were going against Syrian army, which numbered 270,000 almost troops, armed with heavy weaponry, with an air force, dug in defensive positions in strategic places, particularly the road between Idlib to Aleppo. So, even the Israeli intelligence believed that the incursion from Idlib was a suicide mission. It barely made any sense. So if the Syrian army stood down and withdrew completely from all defenses everywhere across the country, then there must have been a strategic reason to make that decision. It had to have been a decision. There had to have been a strategic reason for that decision, not Bashar al-Assad being catatonic and only caring about his car collection and leaving his, all this nonsense that got piled into the mix then. And so then I had to ask myself what agendas could make sense to explain this. So that's what's at the origin of my initial report.
Yeah, I see that. But around the web, there are a lot of ideas of what happened. One of them is telling that Russia cannot be involved too much in that Syrian problem because Russia has itself a problem, we know where. Then Iran cannot give too much attention to the situation in Syria because Iran is involved in another area. So we know where. So that's why the idea is that Turkey took an advantage of the situation and with the help of intelligence from the USA and MI6 and together with Israel. So they took that offensive. Why not?
Yes, but you see, longer term, what I read from Vladimir Putin's statements and other Russian official statements is that they have a long-term commitment to overhauling, to completely rebuilding the security architecture on the Eurasian continent, because this is, the security architecture we now had, or we could better call it insecurity architecture, is the the legacy of the British Empire. And what the British were trying to achieve is to dominate the whole Eurasian landmass, which is so vast and it has such, it's 7/8 of the world population. Obviously, it's out of the question that you might be able to police that by deploying military, British or American or NATO military units around the continent. So the British approach to this was to create this whole arc of crises where the basic recipe is divide and rule. So you balkanize everywhere. You pit one weak political entity against the other. Make sure that they remain weak so that the Western interests could dominate the region. And then you also create the foundation on which you can strike at the pivot power. And so, now that I mentioned the word pivot power, I have to explain the historical context. The British, the people who were, let's say, the guardians of the British Empire at the time, were concerned at the turn of last century, in the early 1900s, that the weakness of the British Empire is that it was a sea power, and they believed that an alternative, a rival empire, would emerge as a land-based empire. And after a long study of geography and history, Halford Mackinder published a paper called the Geographical Pivot of the World, or something to that effect. And basically, their hypothesis was that the most likely geographical place where this new land-based empire might emerge is what he The paper title was Geographical Pivot of History. That this would be an expansive territory comprising Russia, the Caucasus, parts of Iran, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, all the way to, well, perhaps approaching Pakistan, and then northward all the way to the northern extent of Russia. And they believe that the most likely power to emerge as a land empire there was going to be Russia. So ever since then, and even since below, because Mackinder gave this hypothesis a concrete formulation. He articulated the thinking, but the mindset of the British Empire vested interest goes back way beyond that. Anyway, this is basically the thinking which has defined British Empire's foreign policy. Their priority was to maintain hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. And in order to do that, they had to prevent the pivot power from emerging in strength. And so from that point, they continued to impose these quagmire traps and wars, primarily at Russia and Soviet Union and Russia, but also any other emerging power. So, as Iran was starting to emerge as a regional power, then they had Saddam Hussein, who was a former CIA asset, launch a war against Iran. And that was an extremely bloody, destructive war that went on for 8 years. And then, there's also, they divided India between India and Pakistan. So there, they can draw either one of those powers into a quagmire, one against the other. Iran with Saudi Arabia, China and India, China and Japan, Japan, Korea, so this whole, from Finland down to the Mediterranean and then across all the way to the Koreas, the Anglo-American empire has made sure that there are all these terrorist proxy forces, these separatist movements and various extremists, and then they seeded every country's government with these non-government organizations, the NGOs, that are then funded by George Soros Open Society, USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, and other of these types of organizations that specialize in color revolutions and regime change efforts. And then if all else fails, there's assassinations, there's overt coups like we just saw in Syria, and there's then military interventions that we also saw in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan and other countries. So this is what is keeping Eurasia always vulnerable to these permanent wars, what is keeping Eurasian emerging multipolar arrangement from taking root, and what is enabling the Western powers to exercise decisive control over the whole continent. And so I think that between China, Iran, and Russia, the commitment is to undo this completely, to pacify this whole arc of crises, because this is essential to the multipolar integrations across Eurasia and to the BRICS future, to the future of the BRICS nations as such. And we see that China has designated Iran as their basically the pivot of the security architecture in the Middle East. We've seen that a Russian relationship with Iran has gone from, let's say, cold to hostile, maybe 10, 15 years ago, to being practically a military alliance today, which is another reason why it doesn't make sense that Syria folded so quickly, because the same Syria and the same Syrian army under the government of the same Bashar al-Assad tenaciously defended their country between 2011 and 2016. And they've done so against the coordinated attack by not only the Western powers, UK, US, NATO, but also against the whole Arab League. Everybody was against Syria at the time, and they launched this whole jihadi force, ISIS and Daesh and Al Qaeda and Khorasan and all of these forces and Turkey. And so everybody went to war against Syria, but they defended, and they defended for 4 years. And Bashar al-Assad never fled Damascus. He stayed there till the end. And it wasn't until September 2015 that Russia finally came to Syria's rescue. And so, to say that they folded now because they're so weak, so corrupt, so demoralized, makes very, very little sense. That Bashar al-Assad suddenly went from a brave and courageous leader to this cartoon villain who fled at the first scent of danger. And then also the Syrian strategic position changed, because before they were practically alone. They had some support from Hezbollah, a little bit support from Iran, but now they are in a virtual alliance with Iran. They have Russian support. They have Russian military presence there in Tartus and Latakia with an air force and with troops. And with the exception of Qatar, they are now on friendly terms with the rest of the Arab leagues. So they have support from many sides. Go ahead.
Sorry. When we are talking about all that belt of instability around Russia and Eurasia in general, one thing I have in my mind is it costs a lot of money.
Yes.
It's huge amount of money. And to pay all that groups now called democratic forces, democratic alliances, in Syria, that's huge budget. It's enormous flow of money. And now we see that in Syria, when we hear that Bashar al-Assad was bad, he was a bad governor, he paid low salaries for the soldiers, for the army, the people who lived in the poverty, and so on and so on. Okay, Bashar al-Assad is gone. He's not in Syria right now. And we see a new government, whoever it is. So how do they manage to resolve all that problems?
Anastasia, you bring up an excellent point, because these brigades of assorted jihadis completely depend on Western donors. They don't have an economy, but they have to now govern Syria. They have to pay public official salaries. They have to pay pensions. They have to make sure that the government, that the administration of the government functions. And Syrian economy hasn't improved. Not only that, if they want to use Syria for oil extraction and these pipelines, they're going to have to mobilize some workforce. So they're going to have to invest very large amounts of money into Syria. Where is it going to come from? Well,
to find investors.
It might come from the World Bank, from IMF, from private institutions like JP Morgan and Citigroup, the usual suspects.
Yeah.
But they're going to have to.
What do they change?
Exactly. But they're going to have some kind of reassurance that this is all going to work, because they now have their basically a stand-in puppet government under control of Western intelligence agencies, with very little control over Syria at all, with very, very dubious ability to govern, because these are really jihadi head choppers. That's what they do. That's what they were trained for fighting. I think that they never expected to be in this position, because they thought that they were going to launch this incursion from Idlib. They expected that the Syrians would defend, and then they expected that this would just weaken Syria enough that they could run a regime change again, but maintaining some kind of a continuity of government in more in line of color revolutions in Ukraine and Georgia and these types of scenarios. Now they suddenly found themselves with these jihadis in Damascus, supposed to run the show. They can't, and so these are all reasons why I suspected that between Russia and Iran and Bashar al-Assad's government, the decision was made to let them in this way, in order to draw them into a quagmire that they will not be able to manage, and that they will just simply overextend themselves, including Israel. Because let's face it, that when we're talking about overhauling the security architecture over this arc of crisis, Israel itself was created by the British Empire for this purpose, to be the element of destabilization of the whole region, in order for the empire to be able to assert its hegemony there. And Israel has fulfilled this function to perfection, and still is to this day. And so I believe that one of the things that has to change is that Israel has to go. And I don't think people should be too shocked by this statement, because even Henry Kissinger, who knew a little about geopolitics, said in 2012, he said that 10 years from now, there will be no Israel anymore. So, okay, so
maybe it will be transformed in something else.
Well, yeah, I think that what's going to happen is going to be a one-state solution, and that one state might be called Palestine and not Israel. And the Jewish people are going to be one of the constituent people of that country, rather than this being a Jewish theocracy, exclusive Jewish apartheid theocracy. It's going to have to be a one-state solution. The two-state solution possibility, I think, is gone for good. And I think that the Iranians and the Russians perfectly understand that, and they are now running an agenda, which I don't know this. I'm going to be guessing, but I think that Iran will remain as a guarantor of peace and stability in the region. I think that farther west towards the Mediterranean, maybe Turkey is going to have a similar role, because Turkey, covers not only access to the Black Sea, but also is a major force in the Eastern Mediterranean, which has been the key region for global security going back 3,000 years. And so maybe
they're trying to resolve. They're trying to regain that position now.
Yes. And so maybe some kind of a deal was made where Turkey is going to fulfill that role. Maybe they're going to be able to pacify the Kurdish question, and maybe take parts of Syria. Israel is going to be drawn into a quagmire. Western powers are going to be in that mix as well. And then longer-term future, and I think we have to count with many years. It took many years for Ukraine question to be close to resolution. It took many years for war in Afghanistan, Soviet war in Afghanistan to come to an end. So I think that give it 5 to 10 years, we will know what the intention of this move was. But I expect that some kind of a peaceful solution between Turkey, Russia, and Iran. There's going to be some kind of a reconstituted Syria. We saw that not only Bashar al-Assad went to Moscow, but also Syria's, I forget his name, but Syria's most powerful military general. And then one of the information that I have is that Bashar al-Assad's brother fled to Iraq with a whole tank division. So, Syrian 270,000 strong military didn't just vaporize. They are somewhere, or at least a large part of it is somewhere.
So I see the situation like that. It will be a trap, economical trap, mostly, because as I mentioned before, the economical problems in Syria, they remained, and before the Bashar al-Assad left the country, all that years, Russia, Iran helped Syria economically. Now someone should take this burden on, and who will it be? Turkey cannot do that because they have a lot of internal economical problems, and they have millions of refugees to handle in Turkey.
Yes.
And this is another point to President Erdogan to blackmail Europe.
Exactly. Bravo.
Or you give me money, or I open the door. And
Exactly.
you, European Union, will have to deal with all that refugees that are hostile to your regime. So all that groups of jihadists, terrorists, whoever else, now they are the governors of or at the governing groups in Syria. So they will have to find somewhere money to bring investors in Syria in such conditions. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. If I were Qatar, I would think not twice, but 300 times before investing into gas pipeline. And that problem, that issue of that gas pipeline from Qatar to Europe was the main reason to mess up all this situation, just to leave Russian gas to buy the gas from Qatar. And to invest in that pipeline, you need money, you need expertise, and you need time. It's not so fast. So how do you think? Will this situation be resolved somehow, or this is a trap?
Well, if you were Qatar, you wouldn't have to worry about any of this because the decision will be made for you because you're a puppet. Your money is sitting at the Federal Reserve Bank and in London, and they will tell you how to spend that money and what to invest in and what not to invest in. That's your position if you're Qatar. So I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is governing Syria or whatever is left of it, because that's going to become a massive money pit in the same way that Ukraine is. Like Ukraine barely has an economy left. And so to make the state function, the West has to give them, I don't know what it is. The dead minimum is $3 billion a month. And I mean, $3 billion in cash, this has to be real money. And so the same is going to be true for Syria. And so where is it going to come from? It's going to come from the United States, Britain, European Union, Japan, the whole Western alliance. But they are already overextended. They've already spent, they bet the ranch on Ukraine. It didn't work out. Now they're adding Syria to that. And, if they fail, if they stop spending the money, then they lose Syria, then they lose Israel, and then they lose hegemony over the whole region. And so, I think that you're very correct to point that all out, and especially the fact that Turkey is now, okay, so we've done this for you, we took down Bashar al-Assad. Well, now you need to pay us a lot of money because, we have 4 million Syrian refugees in Idlib. 90% of these depend on handouts coming from Turkey. Exactly. So you're going to have to pay up, or else if you can't, we're going to let them go and they're going to be all over Europe. And so you deal with them. So now the Europeans are on the hook there too. So it's such a trap. It's such a quagmire. I have no doubt that the decision to let them into Syria was deliberate and strategic. So in the short term, it looks like a defeat. In the long term, I think it's going to be the same defeat as it was when the Western powers walked into Afghanistan in 2001. And then in 2003, they walked into Iraq. Brilliant victories. Everybody was celebrating. Oh, look at us, how big we are, how clever we are, how powerful we are. And then they took down Gaddafi. And then they took down the elected government of Ukraine. So all victory after victory after victory. But if you look at the long-term trend of all those victories, you realize that they're all Pyrrhic victories and that every victory is only a step towards a much, much bigger strategic defeat. And I think that the West is marching in the very same direction now.
You see. Okay. Well, what can we say to our viewers? The viewers from the USA, prepare your wallets. the viewers from European Union, Europe in general, prepare your wallets too. So, Alex, we have to close right now, and I would like to thank you for being with us today to explain to our viewers your point of view of that trap in Syria. That was very insightful. I hope our viewers enjoyed today's interview, and I hope to see you again on our channel.
Thank you for having me, Anastasia. There will be with pleasure. And until the next time, I wish everyone Merry Christmas who celebrates, and a very good start in 2025 with prayers for peace in the world and a better future for all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, our viewers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe to find us on Telegram and Substack. Stay with us and think BRICS.